Hello everyone, welcome back to Survivor Talks with Mike. Today we'll be covering the post-merge of Survivor Marquesas. There's a lot to cover, so let's hop right into it. Episode 7 starts at the Maramu camp. They stumble across some skeletal remains, likely from a ritual or cannibalism. Kathy feels things are tense and she needs something to change since she won't be able to break up Nalia and Pascal. They get a letter saying they'll need to send one representative, so Kathy volunteers to go. Over at Rotu, Rob doesn't trust that John will stay true to voting out the other tribe first at the merge, so he needs to shake things up. When they get their letter, Rob sees his opportunity and volunteers to go. So Rob and Kathy meet at a place where Jeff greets them with pizza, beer, and a place to stay overnight. Tells them that they are merging and will be in charge of coming up with the new tribe name and painting their flag. Rob tells Kathy that all the old Rotu are planning to vote her out next. Kathy says that Gina told her Rob was two-faced and lazy. They both agree to work together, but also both don't trust each other. They get very drunk and spend the night together. They come up with the tribe name Soliantu, which means agents to the sun. So now at the new Soliantu tribe, or I guess first at the Maraamu camp, Rob and Kathy show up to pack everything up, and then they head to Rotu camp, which will serve as the Soliantu camp for the rest of the way. They arrive and set up everything there and hand out the new pink Soliantu buffs. The general, Robert, isn't happy about it being pink, definitely has some type of insecurity about his manliness, like Rob mentioned in the pre-merge. Rob, Kathy, and Zoe go for a walk where Rob confronts Zoe about the plan to vote out Kathy, catches her in a lie in doing this. Kathy doesn't know who to trust. She runs off to the waterfall to have some thinking time alone. At the first immunity challenge, they have to balance on platforms out in the water. Rob should feel like he needs immunity, but he still lapses in concentration, and while goofing off, he touches the platform. It comes down to Kathy and John, but John also has a lapse in concentration and touches the platform while reaching down to grab his shirt that he took off, so Kathy wins immunity when she needed it. Back at camp, Rob and Sean are confronting John. Things are getting really heated, which Vesepia tells us is too much drama for her, and she doesn't want to be involved. Sean says that he would have lost it as much as Rob did, but he has actually bonded with John over their struggles. John then tries to reassure Kathy, but she doesn't fully buy it. At Tribal Council, John and Robert say they've played with integrity and won't cross a line of lying, but Rob then has no problem saying he's lied and that others there have also lied plenty. Rob is voted out, with even Vesepia voting against. So my thoughts on Rob. Our first introduction to Boston Rob is him at his most unhinged. This is him at his most entertaining, but also his most problematic, especially with what he says to or about John. He needs to refine his game a little if he wants to win, but this version of him at least is fun to watch. My review for this episode is a lot of fun. I really enjoy Rob and Kathy's interactions throughout. This also sets things up pretty well for the rest of the merge, but Rob clearly had to go for that to happen, as nobody from the majority would have flipped to his side. I give episode 7 a score of 9 out of 10. On to episode 8, Vesepia tells us that before the last tribal council, she talked to Rob and told him she would be voting against him just to make sure there isn't any bad blood between them. Kathy goes to Zoe to talk about whether they were targeting her had she not won immunity. Zoe tells her no, but Kathy sees that as a lie. Sean knows he's next on the chopping block, so he goes around trying to get more people to side with him. Kathy and Vesepia are on board, but they need to get Pascal and Nalia. Both Pascal and Nalia would rather see John go to the end than Sean or Vesepia, however, and seem perfectly fine with being 5th or 6th. The reward challenge is a kite flying challenge for a Snicker bar and scuba diving. It's a really lame challenge, and Kathy seems like the only one that even manages to fly her kite, so she wins. John was a little worried after Sean's crusade, but he gets assurances from Nalia and Pascal. He is relieved to have people who seem to be completely willing to give up their game for his sake. At the immunity challenge, they have to answer trivia questions about Marquesas, and if they are correct, they get to chop another player's ropes. After a player takes 3 hits, they are out. Sean, Vesepia, and Kathy are targeted first. But after that, the Rotu 4 Alliance become cocky, showing their pecking order by targeting Pascal. Sean uses that to point out where he stands in their alliance. Tammy ends up winning the immunity. Back at camp, Nalia and Pascal are offended by how blatant the Rotu 4 made their alliance be. So Nalia convinces Pascal to make a move with her to stay in the game instead of just being a pawn. At Tribal Council, the Rotu 4 are feeling a little overconfident, but once the votes are made, we see Sean's voting confessional as he votes for John. He says, "Checkmate, thought you had me." It's really one of the best voting confessionals of all time. John is then voted out 6-3 with even Zoe flipping, surprisingly. Someone must have tipped her off, or she just made an incredible read. So my thoughts on John: I really enjoy John as the antagonist of the season, and he was really playing what would have been a perfectly sound game to win up to this point. He just made it too clear that the outer layer of his Onion Alliance was the outer layer. I wish he would have gotten to play again, but it still has yet to happen. My review for this episode: this is one of the all-time great episodes of Survivor, with the first ever flip of power. The build up to it plays out perfectly as well, with us getting to see the full story of Nalia and Pascal going from being aligned with John to voting him out. Sean plays this whole episode brilliant and is the shining star of the episode. There is one minor issue with the episode, that being the kite flying challenge. Otherwise, it's perfect. And I'm still going to give this episode a score of 10 out of 10 because it's just a must-watch episode of Survivor. On to episode 9. This is the recap episode, and there really isn't anything interesting that is given to us from it. It's basically just a recap with a few little extra scenes that don't add anything. So on to episode 10. The newly aligned group of 5 are feeling on top of the world. They are elated to have leveled the playing field. Robert and Tammy see the writing on the wall and have become grumpy, while Zoe is trying to distance herself from them. Zoe tells Tammy that she never really liked her to begin with. At the reward challenge, they get split into pairs. Sean's swimming has improved quite a bit while out there, and him and Pascal win a horseback ride and feast with the local. During the horseback ride, Sean struggles with it, and it's pretty funny. He complains about his balls hurting while riding the horse, but once he gets comfortable, he starts to have fun. Pascal, seen issues with Sean at the beginning, but is now starting to understand him. The two of them bond over this reward, and they enjoy the time eating and dancing. They even smuggle some food back for the rest of the tribe to enjoy. Tammy and Robert try to get Nalia and Pascal to come back with them, and are saying that John didn't speak for how they felt, but Nalia and Pascal see right through it. Robert and Tammy imply that if Nalia and Pascal are at the end with Sean or Vesepia, they won't get their vote. The immunity challenge is stilt walking. Tammy, thinking she is the next target, goes off and practices, and it pays off as she wins her second immunity. Zoe is trying a little too hard to suck up to the other 5. She makes them all bracelets. At Tribal Council, Sean has a bit of an emotional moment as he is missing his mother and was grateful for the bonding experience he had with Pascal. In the end, Zoe is voted out unanimously. So my thoughts on Zoe: she didn't really get much airtime, and a lot of what she did get, her actions and her words never really matched up. Also, she's apparently a work hard, play hard type of person, and she really wants everyone to know that. She says it like 2 times throughout the season, and will say it again later. My review for this episode: the reward with Sean and Pascal is the highlight of this episode, but otherwise it just feels like a fairly standard episode. Now there's a new group in power, and they have full control, so these episodes around here will just be like this until they have to turn on each other. We also had another pretty lame challenge in this episode with the stilt walking. I give episode 10 a score of 7 out of 10. On to episode 11. Everyone is feeling pretty weak at this point and dreaming of food. Kathy doesn't think that talking about food is healthy for them, so she goes out looking for some food. It's Vesepia's birthday, and everyone wishes her a happy birthday, but Sean in particular is trying to make it special for her, since he knows she misses her family a lot, and it's really sweet to see how she treats her, or how he treats her. The reward challenge is for an overnight stay in a yacht, where they will get to clean themselves off and eat a huge meal. Pascal wins in an impressive effort. He takes Nalia with him. It's not surprising, but Sean feels he should have brought Vesepia since it was her birthday. Since Sean and Pascal smuggled food back from their reward challenge, or their reward that they got, everyone hopes that him and Nalia will do the same. We see that Pascal and Nalia are getting some very rich and heavy-seeming food, which I figure would be very hard on their bodies at this point, though we never really hear anything about how their bodies reacted to it. Everyone waited up for them to return, only to find out that they didn't bring any food back with them, and then they have to sit through Nalia explaining how great it was to get clean and all the food they got. She then offers them each a nibble from the after-dinner mint she still had in her mouth. This continues into the next morning, and everyone is taking note of it. It's a really bad look for Nalia. Robert and Tammy still know they are on the chopping block, so Robert wants to try catch a pig and hopes Tammy will win immunity so that they can use that leverage to stay longer. At the immunity challenge, however, Robert ends up winning. Back at camp, Sean and Vesepia discuss teaming up with Robert and Tammy to take out Nalia, since she the sweet girl act to gain sympathy, which could be dangerous to keep around to the end. It turns out they didn't go through with it, however, as Tammy is voted out at Tribal Council. So my thoughts on Tammy: if the Rotu Alliance had been able to stick around and remain in power, I could very easily see her as being the one to come out on top. She played hard right to the end and was decently likable. She was also pretty good in the challenges. My review for this episode: this was another pretty standard episode with a big reward, but it wasn't nearly as entertaining to watch as the last reward was. It also had another pretty lame challenge in a popcorn popping challenge. I give episode 11 a score of 6 out of 10. On to episode 12. Kathy tells us that everyone is missing home and their loved ones. She is in particular missing her son. Seems like a perfect time to have a loved ones challenge. Jeff calls in each of their loved ones who will be competing in this challenge. Kathy's son Pat ends up winning, so he gets to come stay with them at their camp for a night. Pat is put to work at camp right away. Kathy uses this time with him to help strategize. They weigh the options of teaming up with Robert, Sean, and Vesepia to take out Pascal and Nalia. After Pat leaves, Kathy feels empowered by him. We get a really funny scene of Kathy and Robert walking to the waterfall while complaining about Nalia, and then we get another scene of Sean and Vesepia walking to the waterfall and also complaining about Nalia. All of this and the previous episode really cast a bad light on Nalia. At the immunity challenge, it comes down to Vesepia, Nalia, and Kathy, an all-women final 3, and they dance to celebrate, but then get serious again, and Vesepia wins. Back at camp, it becomes very clear that Kathy is not going to team up with Robert. He tells us it's his time to go. At Tribal Council, Nalia is redeemed a little bit as everyone acknowledges they were surprised to see how much game she has. Robert is then voted out unanimously. So my thoughts on Robert: the general kind of came and went throughout the season without making too much of a splash. Props to him for being the last of the Rotu 4 standing. Don't really have much else to say about him. He's the less memorable Rob of this season. My review for this episode: this is the first time that we get to see everyone's loved ones on site, and seeing them compete in the challenge was fun too. Kathy's time with Pat was entertaining as well, as he seems to be the complete opposite of this episode. Definitely seemed like a step up from the previous one, but still fairly standard and predictable. I give episode 12 a score of 7 out of 10. On to episode 13. Kathy is seen as the swing vote, as Nalia and Pascal won't each other off, and Sean and Vesepia are seen as linked. Vesepia says that while her and Sean are seen as together because of race is not an issue on the beach. This somehow gets misconstrued, and Nalia and Pascal think that she is playing the race card to get Kathy to vote with her. Pascal says that he's never trusted Sean. He's been lying since the beginning, which contradicts what he has said before about him being straightforward and honest. He also says that Vesepia is foolish, untrustworthy. The reward challenge is for a Saturn Vue SUV. Sean wins by a landslide with nobody else even close for second place. Back at camp, Pascal talks about how the game has affected everyone's bodies and mind. He in particular is feeling very dizzy and weak. Kathy gets everyone to go look for food together, and they manage to get some for that night's dinner. Vesepia, seeing how Pascal seemed down, goes to talk with him. He tells her his suspicion of the other 3 working against him and Nalia. So Vesepia suggests they have an open discussion with everyone to air it out. That night around the fire, they talk it out, and Pascal and Nalia reveal they won't vote against each other. They assumed that Sean and Vesepia were in the same situation, though that was never actually the case. They've been together since the start, but they never had any agreement. Sean was always closer to Rob at the start, and Vesepia even tried to integrate herself into the Rotu tribe while Sean was trying to work against them. The next day at the immunity challenge, it's close, but Kathy pulls out the win over Nalia. Pascal has a confessional where he says that he is from Georgia and Sean is from Harlem. This next vote runs deeper and Sean has to go. I felt like it was very racially charged, and I really didn't like to see it. At Tribal Council, everyone is vying for Kathy's vote, and I think she was going to go with Vesepia and Sean, but Sean pops off a little too hard, and while I understand his emotions in this situation, he can't be putting words in Kathy's mouth, and I think that's what pushed her over the edge. So Kathy sides with Nalia and Pascal, and Sean is voted out 3. So my thoughts on Sean: he is my favorite player of the season. He gives the most entertaining confessionals, and he's so well-spoken and intelligent. I think he did a great job of representing the Harlem inner city youth he was hoping to inspire. It's a complete shame that Survivor has never brought him back, as he is such a highlight this entire season. My review of this episode has some potentially uncomfortable moments with how Pascal talks about Sean and Vesepia, but the conversations around that are important to have, and them acknowledging this imbalance created by Sean and Vesepia being the only people of color on the season all the way back in season 4 is great. It's not great that it took them 40 seasons to do anything about that, but the conversation was started here at least. Other than that, the challenges were a absolutely a step up from previous ones. I give episode 13 a score of 9 out of 10. On to the finale. Kathy is uncertain whether she made the right decision, but will only be able to find out once they get to the next tribal council. They get a letter about the next immunity challenge being the Fallen Comrades quiz. This is good news for Vesepia since her luxury item was a poetry book, and she's been taking notes on everyone since the beginning, and she got to know everyone pretty well throughout the season. At the immunity challenge, thanks to her studying, Vesepia wins. They go straight into tribal council. Kathy wants to whisper a plan into Vesepia's ear, but Jeff won't allow it. He wants everything to be public for the jury to hear, which is interesting because nowadays he would let anyone just get up and start whispering. And I much prefer this, making it like forcing it to be public so that the jury can see what's going on and hear what's going on. They make a deal to vote together and force a tie, and if Kathy gets through, she will bring Vesepia to the end with her. Vesepia agrees, so we end with a vote of a tie of 2-2 between Kathy and Nalia. They can't come to a consensus for who to vote out, so now they go to rocks as a tiebreaker for the first time ever. Kathy, Nalia, and Pascal all will draw rocks, meaning that even though Pascal didn't receive a vote, he is vulnerable. Pascal reaches in and says it feels like purple, and he was right, so Pascal is now out. My thoughts on Pascal? Pascal has some good moments throughout the season, but he's a pretty passive player, just going along with Nalia. And then he also has some really bad moments with his treatment of Sean towards the end. I also know of some things about him outside the show that make watching him in this season a little bit rough. Jeff wakes them up early the next morning to begin their day. They have to assemble an outrigger canoe, which they do through the magic of girl power. They then get to paint tattoos over themselves and go through the rites of passage. They don't do any voiceover for this one, so it feels a little bit like a downgrade from last season. They then get to the final immunity challenge, which is the hand on a hard idol again. At one point, Nalia tells Kathy she is showing a lot of cleavage, and while trying to cover herself up, she falls off. Vesepia then immediately makes a deal with Nalia to go to the final two together if Vesepia steps down, which Nalia agrees to. Vesepia probably didn't have to do this because Nalia would have taken her anyways, but it's good for her to get that assurance anyways. At Tribal Council, Pascal isn't there for the jury. John gives an update on him. He passed out due to dehydration, but is in good hands. Kathy is upset that Vesepia made a new deal so quickly, but Vesepia didn't feel she had any obligation to stay in the challenge for Kathy's sake. Nalia then votes out Kathy. My thoughts on Kathy, she's a fun character and she goes through such a great arc throughout the season, from not being accepted early on to being beloved in the post-merge. Pre-merge Kathy and post-merge Kathy almost seem like two entirely different people. Moving on, we hear from each of the jury members before the final tribal council. Most say that both deserve to be there, except Robert, who doesn't think two girls should have beaten him. John says he wants an honest answer from them, and if he gets that, they'll get his vote. Sean says he'll vote for who he thinks deserves it for playing the game best. Zoe is happy two women made it to the end. At tribal council, for their opening statements, Nalia sounds very nervous and repeats herself quite a bit, while Vesepia seems to have actually thought out what she'll say and has a purpose. Most of the questions aren't that interesting, but I want to point out that Zoe once again said that she has a work hard, play hard personality. Nalia keeps saying that she didn't start playing the game until day 24, but that really isn't a good argument to be making for why they should be voting for her. Vesepia has to own her game a little better, but otherwise does a good job throughout. I want to remind that Robert and Tammy said they would not vote for Nalia if she goes to the end with Vesepia and Sean. When they vote, we see Sean voted for Vesepia, and so did John. He says he wanted Nalia to apologize for turning on her alliance with him and feels that Vesepia was honest about how she played the game. This means that if Robert and Tammy stuck to their word, we already know who won at this. Jeff takes the votes in a helicopter back to New York, where the votes will be read live. He takes a moment to look at the Statue of Liberty on the way. I thought that was just kind of a funny little moment of him staring into the Statue of Liberty's eyes. Before reading the votes, Jeff asked them how the experience watching over the last 13 weeks had been. Vesepia is surprised how many people thought her and Sean were allies, and Nalia says people had a hard time wrapping their heads around her being sweet but also cutthroat. The votes are read, and Vesepia won 4-3. Robert and Tammy did keep their word. So my thoughts on Nalia, I found her to be incredibly dull, and with all the negative content they gave her, I never really thought she had any chance of winning come the end. And my thoughts on Vesepia, I felt like we didn't get enough of her. Like, there's There's enough there to tell the story, but it could have been better showcased. I did enjoy her on screen, however. She was quirky and well thought out. I normally don't care for religious types, but she never came across as too preachy to me, at least. My review for the finale: this finale, for the most part, is good. My only gripes with it is the rock draw isn't a good tiebreaker for at the final four, and the rites of passage was a step down from the last season. After the rock draw, it basically just feels like if Kathy wins final immunity, she wins the game. Otherwise, Vesepia wins. I give the finale a score of 7 out of 10. And then a couple little things on the reunion show. It was hosted by Rosie O'Donnell. She came in riding on a bike with Colby Donaldson from season 2, and she gives everyone on the cast a Saturn view. That's it for the post-merge. It was a much better improvement from the pre-merge, I thought. And now we'll go on to some other topics over Marquesas in the next couple weeks. If you want to catch those, hit subscribe. If you like this video, hit like, and thank you for watching.